All right, hello. So my name is Daniel Alarcón, and yes, mostly I write fiction. I've done a lot of that. I have two novels, a book of stories, another book of stories coming out. But I sort of decided to try different ways of telling stories. So what I'm going to share with you today is a particular story that I worked on for Ambulante. It's kind of an experiment. It's a multimedia experiment in storytelling, which I think as a novelist, you know, the novel's an infinitely malleable form. You know, you can do lots of things with it, and it's by its very nature it can't die because it is shape-shifting. You know, but so I've always been interested in narrative experiments, and Ambulante, I see it as another narrative experiment. It just so happens that the materials that I play with are true. So this is a true story, and for those of you who've read my novel, there's a lot of overlap in that the protagonist of that novel is a person going around. The narrator of that novel is a person going around trying to recreate a story, and that's what journalists do. So I feel a lot of affinity with both my narrator and with this. I think they complement very well. So afterwards, this takes about 45 minutes or so, and then afterwards, happy to take questions about this or anything else. So this story begins in July 2012 with the Peruvian premiere of a game show. By that time, it had been in almost 100 countries, and in Peru, it became an immediate success. This is the opening sequence.
Buenas noches. ¿En qué preguntas separan hoy a un peruano de ganar 50.000 soles en efectivo? Solamente tiene que responder con la verdad, toda la verdad y nada más que la verdad. ¿Quedará alguna persona honesta en el Perú? Es el momento de conocer el valor de la verdad.
So if you're Peruvian, you know this host. His name is Beto Ortiz, but everyone knows him as Beto, just Beto. He's been on television for 20 years, and if it's true that he polarizes public opinion, it's also true that people love him. I've seen it myself. Everyone knows who he is. I once asked him what it was like being famous, and he laughed. That's like asking me what it's like being fat, he said. I don't remember what it's like being skinny. When he took the job as host of El Valor de la Verdad, he was already considered the most powerful journalist in the country, and he liked the format immediately.
Me pareció que era una fórmula muy astuta para conseguir lo que normalmente a los periodistas nos cuesta muchísimo conseguir, que nos digan un poco más de verdad de lo usual, ¿no? Entonces, al convertir la entrevista en un show y al convertir el encuentro con el personaje en un juego de concurso, el desafío se planteaba de manera mucho más descarnada y directa.
So this is how the show works. Before the taping, each of the contestants is subjected to a polygraph or lie detector test. They're asked a bunch of questions, maybe 50 or 60, a lot of them really uncomfortable. Then on the show, they face some of those same questions again. Their answers are compared to the results of the tests, and as long as they keep telling the truth, they keep winning money. And if they get through 21 questions, they win 50,000 soles, almost $20,000. But if they lie at any point, or rather, if the polygraph says they lie, they lose it all. They don't know which of the uncomfortable questions they'll face. Ruth Thalia was the show's first contestant.
Ruth Thalia Sayas Sánchez, operadora de call center, 19 años. Vive con sus padres en Huachipa, Lima.
So this is Huachipa. If you aren't from Lima, let me set the scene. Huachipa is an area that's sort of rural, sort of urban, on the outskirts of the Peruvian capital. It's bordered by the Central Highway, which takes you out of the city and into the mountains. There are dusty, unpaved streets, small farm plots, and half-built houses. All over the neighborhood, at any hour of the day or night, you can see moto taxis coming and going. This is the neighborhood where Ruth Thalia lived with her parents, her sister Eva, and her younger brother, who was only 8. To her family, Ruth Thalia was funny, charismatic, intelligent. But when Beto met her on the set of the show, his first impression was a little different.
La verdad es que una chica muy promedio, ¿no? Una chica que era atractiva, pero no era una persona que llamara mucho la atención, una chica más bien perfil bajo, apocada.
But when the cameras came on, something changed. It was as if she lit up. Ruth Thalia, according to the rules of the game, could bring 3 guests. She chose her parents and her boyfriend. This is her mother.
Mi nombre es Vilma Rosario Sánchez Rojas, huancabelicana. Tengo 42 años. A Lima vine por el futuro de mis hijas.
So, Huancavelica, the province where Vilma was born, is about 14 hours overland from Lima. Rutalia and her sister Eva were born there, in the countryside, but the family moved to Lima when they were very small. She and her husband Leoncio have a band that performs traditional Andean music. She sings and he plays the harp. They also own a glass shop. The day of the taping, Vilma went with her daughter to the station. Rutalia hadn't told her mom much about the show. The questions, as far as Vilma understood, had to do with how they'd come to the capital, where they'd come from, that sort of thing.
Y entonces yo le dije, ay, pero con esas preguntas van a ganar plata. Le digo, sí, mami, van a ganar plata con eso. Y entonces yo le dije, entonces yo le voy a decir toda la verdad.
How they survived those first difficult days in Lima, selling watermelon, pineapples, anticuchos. It's a common story, but that doesn't make it any less heroic. When I talked to Vilma, I asked her if she was happy that day of the taping. She told me she was.
Feliz, yo me fui, voy a decir todo con ese orgullo como provincial. Soy huancabelicana con mucho orgullo, señor B.
So they put on makeup, gave her a microphone, and sat her on stage next to her daughter.
Sí, desde el momento que mi hija, como se llama, que iba a ir al programa, yo estaba destrozado.
This is Leoncio Sayas, Rutalia's father. He also went to the taping that afternoon, but without the same enthusiasm as his wife.
Yo dije a ella también no vayas, dije no vayas. O sea, mi esposo me dijo que tú, que cualquier cosa no quieres apoyar. De repente yo decía, si lo privo esto, de repente le voy a truncar en su camino. Eso. Ya bueno, pues dije, está bien.
On the set, his anxiety was palpable. What are you worried about, Beto asked him. The things I might learn about my daughter, he said. The third guest that afternoon of the taping was a young man named Brian. This is how Beto remembers him.
Era casi un niño, ¿no? Era un chiquillo muy joven, un mototaxista, el típico chico de barrio que se reclusea, que sobrevive, que tiene su enamoradita, que se va a jugar el fin de semana, o sea.
Brian was introduced as the boyfriend. He lived in the same area of Huachipa, not far from Rutalia's family. He was a serious kid, not very talkative, but handsome. You could tell immediately that he was uncomfortable.
Era un muchacho callado y no te miraba a la cara, medio hablaba agachado y...
No sé por qué, discúlpenme, joven, yo le odiaba a ese chico.
Brian had soccer posters adorning the walls of his old room just off the dirt floor kitchen. He kept a cat and a rabbit as pets, both black, as was his preference. But he wasn't a dour or unpleasant boy. In fact, Brian's mother, Mary, told me her son was always helpful and kind. And he hadn't had it easy, that's for sure. He'd stuttered, Mary told me, ever since an old boyfriend of hers had pushed him down the stairs when the boy was only 8. For years, Brian had accompanied Mary to the market at dawn, helping her sell breakfast plates to the workers. At the time of the taping, he was renting a room in the neighborhood, just a few minutes' walk from his mother's house. And this is the first time we see him on the show.
Lígidamente.
Enamorado.
Tú eres enamorado.
Brian Romero Leo.
Brian Romero, como causa por acá. Muchas gracias por haber aceptado venir y acompañar a Rutalia en este desafío que ella ha decidido tomar. ¿Cómo estás tú? Veo que tu pierna derecha se mueve incesantemente, ajena a tu voluntad.
Yo,
¿Nervioso?
Sí, preocupada, se me ha sacado la vuelta, ¿no?
Eso es todo lo que te preocupa. Lo demás no importa, ¿no?
Bueno,
Ok, no, relájense, recién estamos comenzando, no se olviden que esto es un juego, vamos a tomarlo con calma.
The Valley of the Truth, El Valor de la Verdad, is taped at the studios of Frecuencia Latina, Channel 2 in Lima. It looks out of place in the neighborhood, like a military bunker dropped in the middle of some residential houses. To get in, you have to make a line in front of a mirrored glass window and show your ID. And it doesn't matter what time you go, day or night, you'll almost always find crowds of people at the entrance, waiting for the security guard to let them in. They go to the station to denounce some injustice or to ask for help for a family member. They go to see their idols or to test their own dreams of stardom. Rutalia was one of these people. She had tried out for soap operas before. She was a dreamer. And perhaps this is what she had in common with Beto when he was her age and with millions of Peruvians. Something very simple. Rutalia wanted to be famous. On the show, the first questions were simple, even funny. That's part of the structure of the program, of course. Beto asked Rutalia if she'd ever skipped class without permission, if she believed it was more important to be pretty or to be a good person, if she'd ever gone without showering for a very long spell. Laughing, Rutalia copped to these minor transgressions, and with each question she won a little money, and everyone was happy. Now, that afternoon of the taping, the guy backstage communicating with Beto on the headset was this guy.
Yo soy Luis David Novoa Jiménez. Te tengo que decir lo que hago, toda esa nota.
Now, if his laugh sounds a little crazy, I want to assure you he's not crazy. He's like the sweetest guy you could ever imagine. Before working in television, David ran a zoo for abandoned animals in his hometown. He writes poetry, and he really approaches the world with a sense of real wonder. At the time, however, he was working as producer for the show. He was one of those who'd done the preliminary interview with Rutalia, and he knew her story very well. He's visited her in Huachipa, he spent time with her family, and he knew better than anyone what exactly was in store for Brian and Rutalia's parents.
Pero como yo no tomaba directamente la decisión, yo era un obrero ahí, ¿no? Yo no presiono el gatillo directamente, ¿no? Donde entra esta gente. Eso iba a ser una sorpresa y quizás un momento incómodo y una vergüenza para ellos.
I asked him what his first impressions of Rutalia were. She was lying, he told me, and he knew it right away. She had secrets. It was obvious. And those secrets, the drama of her situation, made Rutalia the perfect contestant for the show. The day of the taping, David's job was to make sure that those secrets got out. Unpleasant, uncomfortable details.
Cuando te ves al espejo, ¿qué ves? ¿Ves una chinita? ¿Ves una cholita? ¿Ves una mestiza?
Bueno, me veo un poco, no, un poco oscurita, ¿no? Un poco
Oscurita.
O sea, yo me digo siempre, no, soy un poco oscurita. Es la forma que digo que soy, como decirlo, morena, ¿no?
¿Te gustaría ser de piel más clara?
Sí, me gustaría ser una...
¿Te gustaría ser blanca?
Sí.
Okay.
There's a lot to unpack in this clip. A lot about race and class in Peru, about the way society is divided along lines that can seem immutable, particularly if you come from a place like Huachipa. I personally get sick to my stomach whenever I see that clip. But this was just one of the many uncomfortable moments in the first half of the show. In another, Beto asked Rutalia about her relationship with Brian, and she seemed kind of uninterested in his feelings. She made fun of him, in fact, and the audience laughed.
¿Te parece Brian un chico guapo?
Sí.
¿Es Brian un chico inteligente?
Más o menos.
So the kind of the comedy, you know, with Brian being the butt of the joke, sort of is the contrapeso, the counterweight to all this, the other drama. Immediately after this moment, I should say, with question number 12, Rutalia revealed that she was only with Brian until someone better came along. And Brian, when you see him, he looks completely stunned. When I spoke to David Novoa, he compared Brian to a zombie. This was hardly all. In a matter of minutes, Rutalia revealed that she was embarrassed by her parents' manners, that she had taken the morning after pill on 3 occasions, that she had sexual fantasies about women. With the 17th question, Rutalia admitted she didn't really work at a call center as her parents believed. The truth was that she danced at a nightclub. Brian was devastated. He begged her not to go on, but Rutalia ignored him. With the 18th question, she had the opportunity to win 15,000 soles, that's around $5,000.
¿Alguna vez has aceptado dinero a cambio de tener relaciones sexuales?
Sí.
La respuesta es... verdad.
2 veces, solo 2 veces. Y de ahí no ha vuelto a pasar ni volverá a pasar. Creo que fue por cuestiones económicas, o sea, que estábamos en una situación económica muy crítica.
Beto asked Rutalia if she wanted to quit or stay on and try for the 50,000 soles. Rutalia thought a while, but before answering, she turned to her parents. She begged their forgiveness, and then she withdrew.
Antes de terminar este programa, yo quiero irme a casa con la certeza de que la verdad siempre es luminosa. La verdad nunca hace daño, aunque duela.
Entonces con una cólera salí afuera, a mi hija le pregunté, hija, ¿qué te pasó? Como siempre ella coqueta, sonrienta, siempre andaba ella, olvídate, son cosas que le he dicho, pero mami, tú sabes en tu conciencia, ¿sí o no, mamita?
Then Ruth Dalia went off to her class at the university. Vilma didn't ask her about it again until the next day.
Hija, ¿qué pasó? Le digo, ¿por qué lo has hecho esto? No, mami, porque ahí se ganaban platita y ya pues, y la gente que va a decir nuestras familias a nivel nacional habrán visto. Aquí me importa, me resbala.
The show aired on Saturday, July 7th, 2012, and it was a complete and total success. First in the ratings, beating out one of Peru's legendary television personalities, Gisela Valcárcel, who had a show on at the same time slot. At the studios of Frecuencia Latina, the production team celebrated.
O sea, éxito, pues, ¿no? Lo que sí, ¿no? Todo fue festejo. Habíamos ganado a Gisela, ¿no? Eso es lo que interesa ahí. El rating.
That week, Ruth Dalia was all over the news. She went on a few different shows, and she said she felt liberated after being on El Valor de la Verdad. She apologized to Brian for making him go through all this and revealed that they'd broken up now. She said they hardly spoke at all. But it isn't all my fault, she said, and he knows that. She didn't want problems, she said. In a way, it was too late for that. The problems had already begun, and a lot of it had to do with where Ruth Dalia and her family were living. Her father, Leoncio, described it to me as a hellhole of gossip. What Ruth Dalia had told her mom, that everything just slid off her, that wasn't exactly true. She wasn't doing great. She felt her neighbors were talking bad about her. According to her sister Eva, Ruth Dalia was in a bad way. She didn't want to leave the house. Unlike Leoncio and Vilma, Eva knew some of those secrets that Ruth Dalia revealed on the show. She knew her sister had danced at a nightclub, for example, and she tried to keep everyone in the family calm, but it wasn't working. One day, Ruth Dalia confessed to her mother that she'd had thoughts of suicide. Now, if Ruth Dalia was having a hard time, she wasn't the only one. Brian was in a similar position, for different reasons. In the neighborhood, he was a laughingstock. Some people refused to take rides with him in his mototaxi. One time, a busload of middle school students recognized him on the side of the road, and the entire bus stopped to yell and laugh and shout insults. He also gave a few interviews in those days.
¿Cómo te sientes? Avergonzado. Avergonzado con mi familia, con mis amigos. Pero todo lo que me ha hecho me he enterado. ¿Cómo puede estar? Si usted siendo varón, ¿cómo estaría?
Sí, yo me imagino y trato de ponerme en tu lugar, pero dicen que cuando uno quiere a veces perdona, ¿no?
Sí, pero también depende, ¿no? Depende de qué te haya hecho. En las cosas que me habló ese día, no digo no se puede perdonar.
According to Brian, he'd been the victim of an ambush. He revealed that he and Ruth Dalia had agreed to pretend to be a couple, but the truth was they'd broken up months before. He said he never knew what he was getting into, and that Ruth Dalia had promised him money for doing her this favor, and she still hadn't paid him. But there was more. Brian accused Channel 2 of being accomplices in this whole charade, something Beto and everyone on the production team denied to me. But the story was already in the press. Beto Ortiz, and in particular his controversial reputation, had a lot to do with how things played out from there. His career has been one of great successes and even greater scandals. And those enemies, and it's fair to say he's accumulated as many enemies as admirers. And those enemies saw an opportunity with this new show. Beto was attacked, and the critics eviscerated El Valor de la Verdad, calling it one of the worst examples of trash television. But in spite of it all, the show stayed #1 in the ratings, and Ruth Dalia, the young protagonist of the show's debut, was closer to her own dream. She was almost famous. Meanwhile, in Huachipa, the problems between Brian and Ruth Dalia got worse and worse. One day, someone broke into her house and stole her laptop. Everyone suspected it was Brian, but there was no proof. The Sayas Sanchez family felt they were under siege from Brian. This is Eva. This is Eva.
Después del programa empezó a pedir dinero, como que 500, después fue subiendo a 1000, después a 2000.
One afternoon, Eva found Brian at the door of her house. He was drunk.
¿Sabes qué, Eva? Tu hermana me ha dicho que me va a dar 2000, pero hasta ahorita no me da, me dice. Ya, yo dijo, ¿sabes qué? Estás mareado, ¿te parece si hablamos mañana?
According to Eva, she said, "I'll pay you." And Brian responded, "Revenge is sweet." On the night of September 11th, 8 weeks after Ruth Dalia had appeared on El Valor de la Verdad, Leoncio and Vilma went to sleep watching a soccer match. Leoncio woke up the next day and his wife said, "Ruth Dalia is not here." Leoncio didn't quite understand. They managed to talk to Eva, who was out of town, and after a while tracked down a friend of Rutalia's from the university. He said he'd been with Rutalia the night before and had heard her get a call from Brian.
Entonces Brian debe saber. Entonces de ese momento a las 9 por ahí será que cuando se llama que sabíamos que Brian sabía algo, ¿no?
So they went to his house and they asked him.
Llorando, gritando, toda la calle, seguro los vecinos me han visto. Estaba arrodillado como a un dios. Brian, entrégame a Thalía, tú lo tienes, papá, le dije. Y el chico, no, así botaba su cara. No, yo no sé nada de tu hija, hace tiempo yo no me comunico. Y se volteó, se metió a su cuarto.
In Peru, if you have no money, if you have no name, if you come from a place like Huachipa and something terrible happens, you don't have many options. You'd probably do what Leoncio did on the morning of September 12th. He'd go to the police and file a missing persons report, but without much hope. Maybe the cops will treat you fairly, with respect, but let's be honest, they might not. So you go where your misery is actually worth something, where you might be heard. You go to the television stations. This is Leoncio.
Porque acá en la ciudad la única manera es mediante los medios, sino otra cosa. ¿A dónde puedes ir? ¿Qué puedes hacer para buscar a tu familia? No puedes hacer nada.
So he went to the studios of Frecuencia Latina, Channel 2, and managed to speak to a producer of Beto Ortiz's morning show, Abre los Ojos. They agreed that he'd come on the air the very next morning and tell his story. They were going to help spread the news that Rutalia was missing. From there, Leoncio went to another channel, where he was turned away, and finally to a local radio station. He spent the entire day looking for someone to help him spread the news that his daughter was missing, and when he got home, he found his wife Vilma in terrible shape. He did what he could to calm her down, and they wondered together what might have happened to their daughter. That night, they barely slept. At 5 in the morning, they were up, getting ready to leave for the television station, when the producer from Abre los Ojos called to cancel.
Me dijo, señor Sayas, nos vas a disculpar, no se va a poder hoy día, mañana o pasado mañana, pero de todas maneras te vamos a llamar.
But Frecuencia Latina didn't call Leoncio or Vilma, and without media attention, the police were dragging their feet. Rutalia's parents were out every day looking for help.
Me fui a Canal 5, a Canal 7, a Canal 4, ya, en Canal 7. El guachimán era medio frío. Me respondió, señora, ¿qué quieres? Ya, deja tu denuncia y vete.
There's an important detail to mention here. In those first days, when Leoncio and Vilma showed up at the studios of Lima's television stations, they asked for help without mentioning El Valor de la Verdad, without mentioning Beto Ortiz. At Frecuencia Latina they had, of course, but everywhere else they told a very simple story. We're worried and we're poor. We have nowhere else to turn. Our daughter hasn't come home. It's a story, incidentally, that's heard every day at television studios across Peru. But the third day, Vilma mentioned this key detail, the one that would once more put her daughter on the front pages of the newspaper.
Al señor le explico, señor, mi hija. Era chica de Valor de la Verdad, le digo. Ahí recién se puso saltón, el camarógrafo saltón. ¿Qué? Chica de Valor de la Verdad, señora.
That same night, on September 14th, 2012, 3 days after she disappeared, the news of Rutalia's disappearance was broadcast on television, Channel 9, also known as ATV. As luck would have it, Vilma happened to see it herself, as she sat down in the waiting room at the central offices of the police in downtown Lima.
Ahí estaba sentada en la televisión. Caso de Rutalia, ¿sabe? Diosito lindo, ahí ya salió. Seguro ahora a mi hija voy a encontrar con ese pensamiento, yo no.
But when they described Rutalia, they didn't call her the girl from El Valor de la Verdad. No, instead the newscaster called her
la prostituta de Valor de la Verdad, la mujer o la chica que se prostituía. Me mató en el alma.
And so now the story changes. We're no longer talking about the disappearance of a young woman from some dusty district of the capital. No, we're talking about a family trapped in a media storm. Everyone wanted the news, and everyone wanted the exclusive. The different stations fought each other for access to Rutalia's family. And I'd like to introduce another character here, a television news reporter named Maribel Toledo. She was working at ATV, Channel 9, a rival of Beto's channel when all this went down. Her news team, like all those on Peruvian airwaves, were trying to pin down the family. Only her team succeeded.
Es una costumbre que se tiene acá en el periodismo peruano que no está bien, me parece, pero por tener exclusivas, los reporteros, los canales, los productores agarran a la gente y la casi secuestran, no sé, pues 3 días.
Y al sexto día ya a TV, ya todos los días ya venía ella. Incluso ya dormía en la calle. Ya no nos dejaba ella.
Leoncio and Vilma went out every day asking for help. They went to the Ministry of Women's Affairs, to the hospitals, to the police headquarters, to the morgue, and they made all these trips in transport provided by ATV, accompanied by cameramen and producers. A family of such limited financial resources simply could not have done all this without the help of a TV station.
En realidad el medio de comunicación juega un papel muy importante, ¿verdad? Muy importante, cuando realmente toman así en serio, muy importante. Entonces nosotros ya, ¿qué nos quedaba? Porque no teníamos quién, ni familia, nada, confiar en ellos, ¿no?
And in the meantime, Leoncio couldn't eat, Vilma couldn't sleep. They received all kinds of calls, extortion attempts, false leads. They lived in this hell, there's no other word for it, always under the watchful eye of the media. One day a man came by claiming he'd found Rutalia, but when Leoncio went to see her, it wasn't his daughter, but another girl who looked just like her, a runaway.
Días desesperantes, no sé, parece que estaría ahí flotando en el aire. Si no podía, pues si estaría vivo o muerto, si estaría despierto o soñando, o flotando, no sé.
Ya el día de hoy se cumple una semana en que esta joven de 19 años está desaparecida. No se sabe absolutamente nada de su paradero.
The police and the news media knew that Brian had been the last one to call Rutalia the night she disappeared, but he continued to claim he hadn't seen her. Still, there were other details that seemed incriminating, or at the very least suspicious. A few days after Rutalia disappeared, Brian had sold his moto taxi and moved out of the room he'd been renting. But to the police and to the press, he denied having anything to do with it. And that's where things stood until the afternoon of September 22nd, 10 days after Rutalia's disappearance, when Leoncio received a call from Channel 9. They told him to be calm. The police had found a body. It was a young woman, and she'd been found on a piece of land on the very outskirts of the city. This was all very far, in an area of dry brown hills of rock and dust. The body had been thrown in a ditch covered by stones and cement. The police supposed it was Rutalia, but someone had to identify the body. Leoncio went with Eva. And he found himself face to face with Lima's press corps, hungry for the biggest scandal of the year. But not every reporter went to see the body. This is Maribel Toledo.
Yo estoy en mi casa en realidad y me llama mi productor y me dice, han encontrado a Rutalia. Me afirma, han encontrado a Rutalia. Me dice, anda, vuela a la casa de la familia. Recuerdo vagamente que era como tierra, digamos, como un terral, la calle, no, me parece que no era asfaltada, y estaba la mamá con los vecinos con unos carteles y unas velas pidiendo por Rutalia.
A somber, disquieting scene, very different from what was happening across town. No tumult, no chaos, no noise. Here, Maribel and her cameraman were the only journalists present. Maribel went up to Vilma.
O sea, creo que le doy el pésame y le pregunto porque, o sea, asumiendo que su hija ya estaba muerta. Y me doy cuenta que ella no sabe. No solo no me entiende, sino no sabe. Porque su respuesta es, sí, sin aparecer y no sé qué. Y entonces me doy cuenta, ok, esta señora está en otra.
These are the situations you might face as a television reporter in a place like Lima. You might find yourself suddenly standing before a mother who in her heartbreak doesn't know or doesn't understand that her missing daughter is no longer missing. She's dead. Maribel could only bring herself to say, "Ma'am, they found a body." Vilma went up to her room and locked the door. Maribel was so upset she called her producer to confirm the news. It was true, he assured her. Brian had confessed. The body was Rutalia.
Entonces, ese es el instante en el que yo decido, digamos, hacer, creo, lo más incómodo y quizás lo más morboso de ese momento y de esa situación, que es subir a ver a la señora. Y justo cuando subo y voy a tocar la puerta, escucho este llanto desgarrador y que dice, no puede ser ella, o algo así. El perro ladraba, el llanto de fondo de la señora, y yo parada con mi micro en la mano sin saber qué hacer.
Maribel told me that her cameraman urged her to knock on the door, but she resisted. And shortly after this incident, she quit working in television. That night, Peruvian TV viewers were witness to the infinite pain of a broken family. They saw the young confessed murderer, Brian Romero Leyva, in handcuffs. They heard the pained cries of Eva and Vilma. They saw Leoncio's stoic expression. The death of Rutalia was the top story on every channel except Channel 2. It was Saturday, so they stuck with their regular programming. El valor de la verdad.
Por tu nombre completo.
Me llamo Brian Romero Leyva. Mi edad es 20 años. Vivo en calle 8, Nievería, en Huachipa.
El día en que... Narra los hechos del 11 de septiembre.
Y el día 11, a las 11 de marzo aproximadamente estará, y le llama Rutalia.
This is taped from Brian's confession. He goes on to say that he and Rutalia made plans to see each other, that they had a bottle of wine, had sex, and then fought. She insulted him, hit him, and then he choked her. He said he didn't realize he'd killed her. It was, in his telling, a crime of passion. The difference between what Brian describes and a planned homicide is the difference between spending a decade in jail or one's entire life. Brian's defense team did everything it could to link Beto to their crime. Their argument was simple, that Brian had cracked under the pressure of the media spotlight. A few days before the trial began, his lawyer read a handwritten letter to the press in which Brian asked Rutalia's parents to forgive him. "I want to confront Mr. Beto Ortiz and take off his mask," Brian said in the letter, "so that the people can understand his manipulative and frivolous attitude in the face of the harm he caused in our lives." Meanwhile, Beto's enemies attacked from all sides. He went on television to defend himself. He said he had nothing to do with the crime. The culprit was Brian Romero Leyva. And in purely legal terms, of course, he's right. But you can't have seen the show without thinking it's a little more complicated than that. Perhaps the question is this one, the one I posed to David Novoa. I asked him, "Do you think Rutalia would be alive if she hadn't been on the show?" His response was simple, "Of course." Then he paused and added, "Well, or maybe not. Maybe she would have died of something else." On February 27, 2014, the court declared Brian Romero Leyva guilty of murdering Rutalia Sayas Sanchez. The court found that Freddy Leyva, his uncle, was his accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison. The vast majority of Brian's confession was found to be false. The police had tracked down a witness, a teenage boy from the neighborhood, who said that the night that Rutalia disappeared, Brian had paid him 50 sodas to let him know when she got off the bus. The boy claimed to have seen Brian and another man force her into a moto taxi. The court determined that Brian's accomplice, Freddy Leyva, owned the property where her body had been found. The motive for the crime was robbery. They had attempted to prize Rutalia's bank security code from her. They wanted her winnings from El Valor de la Verdad. Vilma, Leoncio and Eva were at the sentencing, of course, and afterward they all spoke to the press saying that justice had been done. But for Vilma,
el dolor nadie me entiende. El dolor era inmenso y es inmenso. Cuando yo me muera en la tumba, dejaré de llorar, dejaré de sufrir.
the second season of El Valor de la Verdad was filmed with only celebrities, politicians, actors, dancers, people who know how to deal with media pressure, and it was a huge success. Still, Frecuencia Latina has decided not to do a third season, and Beto Ortiz has gone back to doing the news. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I got any questions that you might have? Yes.
This format. It seems to be picking up steam. This like the kind of live storytelling with the multimedia element. It seems to be like really big, and you see this with like Radio Lab's Floor of last year and everything that Snapdragon does and so on.
Right.
How did you get into this? And is this an angle that you're heading in?
Apparently, yes. Well, Radio Ambulante, we've done 4 live shows now, and we really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. I got into it. I mean, with this particular story, is the first time I sort of had the elements, and I wanted to be able to. I'd written a print version of this story, and I'd done the radio version, which is like a 45-minute radio doc in Spanish, and the print was in English. And I wanted the people who read the story in English to be able to hear the voices of Leoncio and Vilma, and Beto too, because they're all so unique, and you can hear the kind of malice and the kind of self-satisfaction in Beto's voice, just as you can hear the pain and the horror and the vulnerability in Vilma's voice, for example. And I think that there's something very powerful about hearing the voice, even if you don't understand Spanish. I think it's important to hear the way they talk. So I had all this tape, and I wanted to create something that would unite those versions, the print version in English and this radio version. And then, since it's a TV show that it's based off, there's a lot of, tape on YouTube that you can just pull and edit and do that. So I just wanted to experiment. I mean, I think, I mentioned at the top the importance of experimentation. I just wanted to play around. I wanted to try it. I'd never done it before. I've really only presented this like 5 times, so it's still pretty new. And every time I'm taking, you could see I was taking notes. There's things that I'd like to fix, or slides I'd like to add or take out. So to me, really, it's all about trying new things. Certainly, I'm influenced by shows like This American Life. Ira Glass had a fantastic live show with dancers that came out to San Francisco that I thought was terrific. We, like I said, Radio Ambulante has done live shows that included DJs and film and everything translated. So the stuff that's in Spanish is subtitled in English, and the stuff that's in English is subtitled in Spanish, because we assume that our audience, you might have monolingual speakers of either language. And it's just fun. The nerves that you get, like I don't get nervous before a reading because the text is already written. All I have to do is read it, But the text, the nerves that you feel for a live show reminds me of like those moments that I used to have like in high school before a big soccer game, or something, which I really enjoy, that kind of anxiety. I think it's helpful for your work. Yeah.
Was this? Were people in Peru aware of the show you've done? Did you get a reaction?
Yeah. It got a lot of reaction. Beto has blocked me on Twitter officially.
Well, that's all. That's not bad.
No, I mean, I when it came out, it was tweeted around, and everyone was tweeting it at Beto. And I wrote him a long email saying, hey, thank you so much for giving me the interview. This is the piece, and I'm sure you're gonna disagree with some things, but I hope you see that I've treated you fairly. No response. I think unrelated to this, I would love to say that because of this something happened, but I know the story went around a bunch, and it was featured on a bunch of big Peruvian websites. And then since then there has been a lot of talk about trash TV, telebasura, but I don't think that it's because of this. I mean, I would love to be up here and say, yes, I launched the conversation about telebasura, but I think it's been building this kind of disgust with what we feed ourselves in the media. I mean, for me, this is really a story as much as it's a story about class. It's a story about access. It's a story about the provinces versus the city. It's a story about the ultra powerful media that feeds off the misery of the poor, essentially. I mean, and it's something that I've been seeing and watching. And I wrote my first novels about that in some ways. But television in Peru is everything. Like I always would joke that in Peru a restaurant owner, when he wants to have a place with more ambiance, he just turns on another television. Like the classic typical. It feels so Peruvian in this restaurant because there's 7 TVs on and no one's watching. They're all super loud. Like TV is everything. And it just takes people up and chews them out. Yeah.
And you think that accounts for her innocence?
I mean, it's a terrible story. I think she's not. I think was a striver, and the only way that she saw to do something with her life, the validation that she wanted was there on the television screen. That's the kind of validation that she wanted, and she wanted all this validation. I think she's a very pretty young woman. She's beautiful, and she had all these issues with with wanting to be something else.
Right.
Wanting to be white in a country that is not white, but yet a country that pushes the ideal of white, intensely,
The innocence just shocks me in this. Is that did she? I don't understand how how this show was set up for her with Beto. Did she know she was going to have to confess that she sold herself for sex? And
Oh yeah, I mean, she definitely was not blindsided by those questions.
She didn't foresee the consequences of that?
No, she didn't foresee the consequences. I think that she felt that she was savvy enough to play it, to write it out. I think that she didn't count on how, on the violence that could be unleashed, and certainly, like, I think that Brian is a killer, obviously, but I also think that the arguments that his defense made are true. He was completely incapable of handling the pressure of that situation. He was a 20-year-old kid with very little education who was suddenly the poster child, the national poster child in a very machist country for the cuckolded, emasculated male. And I mean, I'm sure, we've all felt embarrassed before, but have we all been embarrassed on national television? And what would that feel like? Now, I mean, this is not at all to justify anything that he did. Obviously, he did something terrible, and he should go to prison for a long time. But he's a victim too. I think that seems pretty clear to me. And what Beto argued and is quite the contrary. He was saying, like, if she hadn't been on television, she'd just be one more dead girl, and no one would even know her name.
That's ridiculous.
The reason why you all care about her is because I put her on television.
That's idiotic.
Yeah, and this story kind of fell in my lap because I was working. I'd gone to sit in on the show because they had done a bunch of stuff about the drug war, like touching on the drug war, and I wanted to write a piece about these kind of pop tribunals and television, and so I asked Beto if I could, see how the sausage was made, and he said sure. And while I was there, she went missing. I was embedded at the show every day, going to production meetings and doing all this stuff. And while I was at the show, she disappeared, and then she was found. So I happened to be in the background during all of this, and was so disgusted by it that I put it all away, set it aside for 6 months, and then was going back through my notes as writers often do, and go back and see if there's anything that we missed. And I read my notes, and I was just like, wow, I wonder if anyone's done a real deep dive into this story, because it's got everything that usually draws me to a story. It's very, to the extent that I can say that it's an Alarcón type story. This is an Alarcón type story because it does have these elements of class and race and violence and like the illusion factory, so it had everything that I wanted. And it turns out that no one had done any deep dive, because no one does deep dives in Peru, because there's just no time and there's no outlet for it, and there's no one who's paying for that kind of work, the months and months of work that it takes to write a piece like this. And then I found the address and just knocked on the door, and Leoncio opened the door and said, come on in. Any other questions? No.
Question.
Yeah.
What you're showing is that the media environment in Peru today is in some ways all part and parcel of a system of neoliberal economics, that it's all unregulated, freewheeling, and unregulated to the extent that it really touches people's lives.
Yes, and I'm especially the way Latin America is right now, I would not be someone advocating for regulation of media. I mean, I feel like that's a very, in the current situation in Latin America, it's a very dangerous thing to be advocating for, because we have the Ecuadorian example and the Venezuelan example of, once you start regulating the media and say that can't be on the air, pretty soon you're writing the news, right? Which we had that in Fujimori did that, but still, I think it's a combination of factors. One is that Peruvian economy has grown a tremendous amount since 2000, but we were behind in terms of media for a long time. And these kind of national or international, global reality TV brands, like Big Brother or whatever, or Survivor, or these things, they came to Peru late. And this show, for example, has been in 100 countries, so it wasn't like this was the first time they'd done it. it was in Colombia, and in Colombia was canceled after a season because this woman admitted that she'd hired a sicario to kill her husband. You know, so it's not that the show. You know, the guy who made the show lives in L.A. American guy. I think he went to University of Missouri or something. You know, fabulously wealthy guy. And actually, I was with Beto the day that I had lunch with him. The day that the body was found, or the Monday after the body was found on a Saturday, and he showed me on his BlackBerry an email that he'd gotten. And Beto's English is very good, but he'd written it in such a way that said, our first contestant has died, was the subject heading. Implying that it's like, you know, there'll be others, you know? What he meant to say was, the contestant on our first show has died, but he said it, our first contestant has died. And he didn't see the humor in it, but I saw the humor in it. I mean, the dark humor, obviously. And I saw the email that this guy had written back to Beto. Of course, I couldn't quote it in this piece because, you know, I don't have the email. There's no fact checking possible. But it was basically like, you know, we can never control what happens when people enter our worlds of entertainment and da-da-da-da-da. And of course, it's not your fault. And, you know, he's right. Legally, he's right, of course. I don't know that what the solution is. I do think that, you know, this stuff sells, and so it's very hard to turn off the spigot. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, here.
I was thinking a couple of things. You as a fiction writer, you're moving here in a very a subtle line between fiction and reality, and I was thinking how you're sharing your narrative voice, the one that you create, with these other voices that are there that we can hear, that are real voices, and just exploring how you move between that fictional world and this other. And suddenly I was thinking of Chronicle of a Death Foretold, journalism,
yeah.
Fictionalizing, but then reality based on a true story, you know.
Yeah.
And then
that's one of my all-time favorite. I mean, it's definitely one of my favorite Garcia Marquez novels, but it's just a perfect short novel. It's absolutely perfect. And certainly, you know, this who I am right now with this laptop and doing these things is the person that narrates that novel over there, which is certainly influenced by Chronicle of Death Foretold, by a number of novels. I think of that novel as being also, you know, the second section of Savage Detectives, you know, with the many voices. You don't know who's doing the recording, you know, who's doing the gathering of all those voices. And I think that there's something in that role of observer where, you know, all novelists have it. It's just in some points the novel, the structure of the book itself requires that you step out of the shadows. And in my role now as executive producer of Radio Ambulante and as a journalist, you know, I quite enjoy. I find it very hard to write myself out completely, and I, you know, I just love being able to go get these stories and bring them back, you know, and especially when you're able to hear the voices and combine it. You know, it's different from writing. Even the prose is different. The prose is not as poetic. The prose is a little more, you know, a little simpler, a little sort of clearer. I think I don't go for the crazy metaphors. I just want to tell you the story the way it is, you know. And so I noticed that in my prose it has affected my prose, but I still write fiction and I still, you know, write pretty sentences, just not here. You know? Yes.
Back to the idea that, I mean, looking at the idea of fact fiction, but the way the story is told, and looking at, like you said, the media saturated, mostly television saturated place of Peru. So in the idea that TV, or the drama heightened for TV, creating drama in real worlds, feeding back into television, and like the entanglement of media world and regular world. But then, I mean, the mother spoke about a number of different TV stations.
Yeah.
And now, how varied are the voices among these TV stations? Because when you said, I mean, this show brought in more viewers than, you know, the most popular show, so you would have to imagine that a lot of people are kind of sharing that subjectivity of this moment. And so really much seeing the story from a single point of view. And in a country where television has such a huge purchase on public opinion,
Right.
is there really, can there be like a link between, say, truth and justice in the case of Brian in the murder? Because he's been, tried and hung
Yeah.
in public opinion before supposedly an impartial jury would get a look at it.
I mean, no one's really telling the story of Brian, and it was hard to tell the story of Brian. I got to say. I mean, one, he's in prison. He was in jail when I talked to him, or when I tried to contact him. His mother was she would talk to me, but she wouldn't let me use her voice on tape. I wrote a questionnaire that I got into Brian, and he didn't respond to it. I got a call in the middle of the night that was from jail, and it was his uncle, who is a kind of very, very savvy talker, and his uncle was pretending to be Brian, but I knew it wasn't Brian because you heard the way Brian talks. And this guy was speaking in complete sentences, so it was just not him. And I knew I could tell who it was, but I played along. But there was nothing that it was just very hard to get, even the few details that I got, it was because I knocked on the mother's door 7 times. I spoke to her once very briefly. I came back. She was like, "Can I come back tomorrow?" She's like, "Sí, joven, sí, joven." So I'd come back the next day, talk to her a little bit more, tell her what I was doing. And then finally I was like, "Look, I don't want to be disrespectful, but if you don't talk to me, nobody is gonna the only voices you're gonna hear are voices saying that your son is a monster, and I don't know if he's a monster or not. I know he did something terrible, but if you don't give me something, that's the only thing I can say, so please talk to me." And then she finally was like, "Okay," and we sat and we talked for like an hour. She showed me his room, she showed me his toys, she showed me his things. I mean, she'd watched him grow up since, in that house for years. And but still, it's not that I have sympathy for Brian, but it's not that he's a killer, and he killed this, beautiful, smart, brave young woman, kind of reckless young woman too, It's just not, there's not nuance, yes, there are many channels, and yes, there are many opinions and many takes on it, but they're all very quick. There's no deep depth, and also the other thing, in Peru, there's sports, there's celebrity gossip, there's scandal, and there's politics, and they're all sort of like mishmash. But like politics and scandal are like the main engines of the narrative, and politics and scandal are almost the same thing now. But like in Latin, it's just it pains me how much we talk about politics in Peru, because our politics are so mediocre and horrible. Like, why are we talking about this all the time? But the same players are exchanging the same dark money back and forth, and corruption and scandal, and it's just horrible. Yeah, it was about time.
Questions then?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No.
2 more questions or 1 more?
I had 2 quick ones.
Oh, okay.
Your description of Peru right now contrasts really directly with Mario Vargas Llosa's. Right? Just so optimistic. He says that he's never been more optimistic about Peru. He thinks it's a moment to really be celebrated. He's very excited that we can go to Lura and find international chain stores.
Yeah, I mean.
And the other more serious question, what distinguishes, are you getting closer to documentary film? What's the difference in the direction you're going?
Well,
the narrator's voice, or?
No, I mean, I'm not, because film is just more expensive to do, so I don't really want to do it. I think radio still feels artisanal, it feels like something I can do by myself, whereas film, it's like, okay, well, now I have to hire a crew and get lights and stuff, and I'm not really interested in film. I'm interested in writing for film, and I'm interested in maybe, for the students in your class, I'm going to play something that I'm working on now that I would love to have an animator do. I would love to do that. But no, film, I don't want to be on camera or do anything like that. But the other question, the Vargas Llosa, is this the Peru's moment? I mean, like, Yeah, I just don't see it that way. I'm very, very worried. I did a long trip into the heart of where our money now is coming from, which is, natural gas, mining, and illegal timber and drugs. Around the time that I was doing this piece, and the corruption is just extraordinary. And the last municipal elections was basically like the narco won the elections, and Peru has very fragile, very, very precarious public institutions that are completely susceptible to corruption. We know this, and we've never encountered the kind of money that's about to enter the game, which is narco money. And the last municipal elections, the narcos had all their candidates, and those candidates generally won. And I don't see how you could be optimistic. I'm terrified, actually. And then you add to that the environmental degradation of unregulated mining, of illegal timber, and then the kind of social decay that comes from all the corruption that surrounds those illegal industries.
And when they get powerful, one of the first things they look to control is exactly the kind of media you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then it gets very dangerous for anyone like you who makes fun of their star TV show.
Yeah. I'm more worried about Beto like throwing a glass of wine in my face if we run into each other at a party. That's the worst that could happen to me. But yeah.
What would be the difference between the coming back to fiction and, let's say, your work in journalism? What would be the influence of your work writing chronicles for Harper's, for instance, and doing Radio Ambulante? What would be the difference between those two kinds of chronicle work, journalism work, in your literary, in your novels, in the last novel?
Well, I think in terms of writing literary chronica or chronicles or narrative nonfiction or whatever, so many of the tools are the same. I think that those are just like, you enter a room and it's either a fictitious room that you're making up or it's a real room. But in any case, you have to enter that room and observe it and pay attention to what's going on and what it looks like and, the people's faces and understand the power dynamics of the people in the room. So it's like the only difference, this sounds so silly, but it's actually, I feel like it's true that whether it's a real room or a fictional room, it doesn't matter. The tools are the same. It's all just observation. In radio, when you start doing radio documentary, you really do start thinking a little bit differently because, when I meet somebody, I think, is this person a good talker? Doesn't matter how interesting their story is. They also have to be a good talker. A good talker doesn't mean that they have to have perfect grammar and speak like the BBC. It means that they need to be able to articulate not even articulate, that's not the right word. They need to be able to transmit their worldview. They need to sound interesting on tape, And I start thinking in terms of sound. Well, no, I'm sorry, we can't do the interview at the beach, because the wind, the sand. Shall I go on? And then also, I feel like my interviews are different. Tell me the story. Again from the beginning. I'll go back. Tell it to me again. This time, describe it as if I'd never seen this room we're sitting in. Describe your daughter as if she hadn't been on TV. What does she look like? Because you're trying to use, to make the theater of the mind, but you're trying to make them make it, And then you get very frustrated when someone says something absolutely beautiful, just as a moto taxi flies by their house, and then you're like, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that very emotional thing that you just said and do it exactly the same way, but let's make sure that there's no moto taxi, so you're creative, but you're also kind of a director of the scene. Now how all that is going to translate into my fiction, I don't know. I know that like the character in the protagonist, the narrator of my novel, holds microphones, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is that my work from Radio Ambulante bled over into my fiction. I think we have time for one more question, or are we done? I don't know the time. Actually, I have no idea. I don't know why I said that. I know we have to walk to another
Yeah, no, we have
classroom.
time.
We have time? Okay, so a couple more questions, if there are any. Yeah, you know.
Well, I have, first of all, I'm a big fan of Radio Ambulante.
Thank you.
Very frequently listening to it in English and in Spanish. The unscripted one that has had Francisco Goldman as well is quite interesting.
Thank you.
But there's a virtuosic even way to handle your role as curator and translator. There's a great awareness of things that are being said in Spanish that perhaps happen in English or the other way around, and your audience may be at the other side of the linguistic divide. But there's a very keen sense of what is being translated, how, for whom, and with what subtleties you're trying to rescue from one language to the other.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're trying to bring in a certain, let's say, local color, or a certain very local inflection. I mean, not of Lima, but of a very specific neighborhood of Lima into the conversation.
Right.
And I find that very interesting and fabulous. I don't know, how do you see your role as translator? Between cultures, from where to where?
Well, I when I used to write for Etiqueta Negra, I would find myself doing the opposite. I would be the person translating the United States for Peruvians, you know. And I always tell this anecdote because I think it's very funny. We had a food and drink issue, and so I pitched a piece on competitive eating. And I interviewed a competitive. I was like, I'm going to interview this competitive eater and write this thing about the United States. And my editor, I wrote him just a quick email explaining what it was about, and he wrote me back and said, Daniel, you know, we really want nonfiction from you this time. You know, and I was like, no, people, Americans really do this. They really time themselves and see how many hot dogs they can eat in 3 minutes or whatever. I was like, and I had to send him some YouTube clips or whatever, and he was like, okay, go. You know, so I do think it's a funny position to be in. I generally try to. I don't want to be, you know, spokesman for Latin America or spokesman for Peru or even spokesman for anything. I can talk with authority about Radio Ambulante as a project and about my work as a fiction writer or as a journalist, but you know, I do feel like there are people in this country who become translators, and it's a very uncomfortable position. You know, kind of cultural spokespersons. You know, like you know, they'll, you know, Juno Diaz. What do Dominicans think about? It's like, you know,
What's that?
What's that?
He courts that.
He maybe courts that. I'm not going to court that. You know, like you know, but you know, like I always think of the sentence that would begin with "on behalf of Latin Americans," and I would just never. I mean, there's no sentence that I would ever feel comfortable saying that would begin with those words, implicit or explicit. You know, I think that what I do on Radio Ambulante is a very honest. Very honestly chase what I'm curious about, you know, what I'm moved by. I also am very, very, you know, to the extent that it's a curated project, I'm very intent on telling stories that complicate standard definitions or standard assumptions about Latin America. So, for example, we just did a big story on Cuba about Cuban music with Radiolab, not salsa, not son, and not rumba. We did a story on Cuban punk rock with Radiolab and a version in Spanish. And it's not that I love salsa and I love rumba and I love son, you know, but that's not. It's not to dismiss that. It's that I want to tell stories that make Americans and even other Latin Americans, because it's not like you're born Latin American, you know everything about Chile, Ecuador, and Mexico. You know, it's like you know, there's not like a download you get when you're born. I just want everyone to sort of understand that it's not one place, you know, it's many places. And so when I go to it, I really bring my natural curiosity. I'm not play acting. It's totally like, you know, we did an interview with Frank, and, you know, Frank's been places that I'll never get to go, and I really want to hear about them. And, you know, we got for the unscripted series, which was an English language series we did for Radio Ambulante, it was just kind of, you know, interviews running the gamut of like journalists and filmmakers and choreographers and scientists and just, you know, people in the humanities in Latin America. Really fun. It was really fun for me, novelists and playwrights, to talk to people and just ask them, you know, because things that I don't know about. And that's the only way to do it, I think. And then in the process, I think, you know, in the same way you prepare for an interview, you know enough that you can ask smart questions, but not so much that it kills your natural enthusiasm and curiosity. You know?
One more?
Yeah, sure. One more if there's one. If not, that's fine too. Okay.
Well, what's your favorite role? What's your favorite thing to do as a producer of stuff?
I love interviewing people, but not interviews like the unscripted interviews, but like the ones where I'm sitting in a room with somebody and they're telling me a great story, and I know that I'm getting great tape, and I just start thinking about what I can do with this tape. I just really love that. Yeah. Thank you all so much.